Hi, this is Wesley Lawton, and I'm the therapist at All Things Grow Counseling, based in Mount Clemens, Michigan. I see people in person as well as across the state via telehealth. And so, wanted to make another video for you today. This is something that I've been thinking about for a long time, so I'm really excited to share it with you. And I've compiled a list of, the list and the title of this video is 20 Things Your Grieving Friends and Family Want You to Know. So this video is really going to be aimed at people whose loved ones are grieving. Now, if you are grieving and you've come across this video, I also hope that you will watch it and get something out of it. I hope that maybe I will be able to put words to something that you've been feeling or experiencing, because that can always be helpful. And maybe you also find something in here that you want to share with somebody who you care about. Maybe you'll put it in your own words to them, or maybe you'll even share this video with them. Um, but if you also come across this video and you yourself are not necessarily grieving, but you have a close loved one who is grieving and you want to know how to support them, then this video is really especially aimed at you. And I think that there are a lot of people out there who fit that description. There are a lot of people who sincerely love and care about people they know who are grieving, but they just feel so stuck or so uncomfortable, and they don't want to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. And what I see happen so often is that people just kind of retreat, or they sort of tiptoe when they're near the person, like they're walking on eggshells, like, got to be careful what I say or don't say. Or maybe they stop inviting the person to things because they don't want to make them feel bad or offend them. All kinds of things. And all this stuff, in my experience working with so many hundreds of grieving people, it's not what they need. In fact, that can be kind of hurtful. It can be taken as if you don't care about them, which really you're probably doing what you're doing because you care about them so much that you don't want to hurt them anymore. So that's why I'm making this video. Now, these 20 things are not in any particular order. They're just sort of what I came up with off the top of my head. Well, of course, I gave it some thought, but I didn't put them in a certain order. It's just the order that they came to my mind. And I'm speaking a little bit off the cuff here, but hopefully this is an efficient video and one that you get something out of. So this might be a two-parter or a three-parter or even a four-parter, just depending on how much I have to say about each point. So I will just kind of see how long this video is going and cut it off when I feel it's the right time. So the first one that I thought about was please talk about the person who died. And one more quick thing is that, as with all of these videos that I do, I'm going to put the content of the video in text as well for people who have a hard time. Um, well, for people who can access it more easily in that way, or if you want to review stuff that way. So anyway, I'm sorry, back to number one. Please talk about the person who died. This is a big one. And it's very common to wonder if your grieving friend, let's say, wants to, like, if they, you might think that the last thing they want to hear is the name of their loved one. You might think that talking about them, sharing memories about them, or talking about how much they would have loved the thing that you're doing, that would just make them fall apart. And that's not what you want, because we interpret sometimes people crying and falling apart emotionally as like we hurt them by triggering that, by causing that to happen with something we said. And like that makes us a bad friend, a bad person, bad family member. But that's not the case. In fact, I would say 99% of people who I talk to who are grieving, they actually wish that their loved ones would bring up the person who died more, that they would be open to talking about them more, or that when they, the grieving people, started talking about them, their loved ones wouldn't freeze up so much and, again, just kind of start walking on eggshells, not wanting to set them off. The reality is that talking about their loved one may trigger their grief. They may start to cry a little bit. But I would say that more often than not, it might make them feel good. It might make them feel like they're still allowed to love their person who died even after they've died, which of course they are. That love doesn't go away just because the person has died. So please talk about the person who died. Generally, the more the better. If the person doesn't want to talk about it, then that's on them to let you know. Okay, and then the second thing is to instead of saying things like, call me if you need anything, or I'm here for you, or anything you need, just let me know, right? That's what a lot of us want to say to people who are grieving, especially in the initial days and weeks. They seem to hear this. But when people say that to grieving folks, um, you can guess how often grieving people actually will call you. How often will they actually say, hey, can you do me a favor because I'm grieving and having a hard time? It happens almost 0 times. So, what is a lot more helpful? It's a small difference, but it does make a big difference. Is to offer something specific, to specific ways to help. So think about, if you know them well, you know what they could use, what would be helpful to them. If you don't know them very well, think about what would be helpful to anybody. So, hey, can I bring you dinner sometime next week? Or how about if I watch the kids while you go for a little walk? Or um, trying to think of what else. Would you like me to just come and spend some time with you at some point? Can we plan a time to get together? Um, what if I bring you by some pie, or whatever it is, um, something that basically anybody would say yes to, right? So to offer specific ways to help, or another good approach for most people is to say very honestly, I see that you're hurting. I really care about you and I want to help, but I don't know what you need. Would you please tell me how I can help? Tell me something that you need. What's something that needs doing? Let me do it for you, or let me help you do it, right? To invite them to tell you what they need. Some people might be a little bit less comfortable with that, but it's a lot more comfortable than them actually taking the initiative, which is usually what ends up needing to happen. But if you see this video, now you know to offer something specific or to ask them what they need. Number 3, don't give advice. Don't tell them what will help them or what they ought to do, what they should be doing, what they're not doing enough. These kinds of things are not well received and they're not really helpful. Right? Grieving people are usually not very open to advice from loved ones, even if it's good advice. And a lot of times it's not good advice, even if you think it is. So just avoid it completely if you can. Don't give advice. Unless they specifically ask, what do you think about this? What do you think I should do here? But I bet that if you take a look at your interactions with your grieving loved one, that probably doesn't happen very often, because that's not what they need. They don't need you to tell them what to do or how to do it. Instead, if you want to let them know something that you think would be helpful to them, draw from your own life. If you yourself have lost a loved one, and understand that it's not the same as their loss, we'll get to that. But if you have grieved, or if you know somebody who has grieved and they did something that was helpful, and you want to share this with your friend who may not have considered it before, all you can do is tell them, hey, I know that you just lost your mom, and when I lost my mom, what really helped was X. And that may not be for you, you can say, but that helped me, so I just wanted to share that with you, right? All you can do is tell them about your own experience, and they can take from that what they will. Maybe they'll think, oh, I'll try that, right? Instead of you saying, here, do this, you're saying, here's something that I did that helped. You're just basically sharing from your own story. And that cannot really be hurtful or offensive if you're not pushing it on them. Okay, number 4, and this is a big one, and I'm surprised that it didn't come to mind first. I remember the very first time that I started thinking about being a grief counselor. It was in my undergrad program. I was getting a bachelor's in psychology, and I took an elective within the psychology program because it just happened to fit in my schedule. It was a death, grief, and loss course. And I remember the professor in that class saying, I think every single class meeting, if you take one thing from this class, let it be this: talk less, listen more. So I want to pass that along to you. Um, if you take one thing from this list, let it be talk less, listen more. People who are grieving, usually there's nothing that you can say that will help them, and I'll hone in more on that at a later number here. But um, most likely what's going to help them is not anything that you have to say, honestly, no matter how smart you are. but it is your presence, your listening, you're giving them space to be where they're at. That's what grieving people generally need. So, excuse me. Talk less, listen more. Simple as that. When in doubt, let it be a rule of thumb, right? Not that you never say anything, but it's a good rule of thumb. If you're wondering how should I respond to the situation, just listen, and that's probably one of the best things you can do. Next, number 5, be very patient with their grief process. Don't say anything to rush them. They would like it to be over more than anyone. The reality is that their grief will never completely end, though it should eventually get easier. And the key word there is eventually. So this is something that actually some people who I worked with recently in a support group, they gave me feedback to expand on this a little bit more. Originally I just said be very patient with their grief process, but they wanted me to clarify, don't say anything to rush them. If anybody wants their grief to be done, it's them, right? So don't tell them that they shouldn't be grieving for this long. They wish that they were not grieving for this long, and they would give anything to get out of this. The reality is that their grief will never completely end, but it will eventually get easier. And to remember that it's going to take a while, right? If somebody is just a few months into their grief journey, they're just getting started. If they're just 6 months, 8 months into their grieving, they're pretty early in their grieving still. If it's been a year or more, despite the fact that the DSM says that if they're having a hard time with their grief after a year, they have a disorder, right? That's something that I and many grief professionals do not necessarily agree with, because to have a hard time with grief a year after your loss, that's normal grief for very many people. That's not necessarily a mental illness, right? That's the way that it really goes. And if you yourself are grieving, you know what I'm talking about if it's been more than a year. So some things about the second year can be harder than the first. Generally, it'll probably be easier, but the second Christmas might be harder than the first one. That's uncommon, but it happens. Or the second anniversary of their death. I mean, I don't know, but it takes well over a year for them to have a hard time with their grief in many cases. Now, for some people, it will just take a few months, 6 months, something like that, and they'll kind of seem back to their normal self, maybe. But that's often not the case. So be patient. Understand it's going to take a while. If they've been grieving for a long time, I know that it probably hurts you to see them in pain for so long, right? It comes from a place of love and empathy that you just can't stand to see them hurting, and so you just want them to be done. And you might tell them that. And you don't mean for it to be selfish. You don't mean to be saying to them, you feel better so that I can feel better. But that's often how it comes across. That is often part of the motivation, if we're honest with ourselves. So give them time, and then give them more time. It's going to take a while. Let me see where we're at here. Speaking of time. Oh boy, 13 minutes. Okay, we better be done for now, and I will be doing another video in the future. This is probably going to be a 4-parter, but I hope that it's worth it. I believe that it will be. And so I'll see you on the next one.